COO, Steve Mast.
Thank you, Shelley, and welcome everyone. Before I get started, I thought I'd just tell you a real quick story that happened to me recently. I was actually having dinner with a good friend of mine who owns and provides technology to the energy sector, mainly the gas and oil businesses. He mentioned to me that how much his industry is and has been changing, and mainly due to technology advancements that these changes have been taking place. But he also mentioned how consumer and cultural changes were affecting the business as well, and really was a key driving force. And after the dinner, it got me thinking about, when you really think about it, every industry is really being transformed due to disruptive technology and really consumer behavior changing so quickly. There's really no industry or business or brand, for that matter, that is really safe today. And when you think about the fast-paced QSR industry, that's one that's in continual change. If you just look at some of the sort of key challenges and trends going on in the QSR space, just the whole idea of trying to create brand differentiation or creating value to the customer, the perceived value for the customer, and how challenging that is in an ever-growing category, and how much consumers are really having a hard time distinguishing between the various different brands. Or if you think of the frequency of new products and packaging and offer cycles, you went from kind of 8 6-week cycles, and in some cases it's 2 weeks now where new offers and new products are hitting the marketplace. Again, part of this is driven by just this consumer behavior where they just want constant change. And probably the last bucket there, when you start looking at new digital businesses and startups that are really disrupting traditional business models. Delivery services is probably one of the biggest ones right now. And one of the concerns with them really is the fact that they kind of own the last mile. In fact, I would argue they're starting to become the key owner of the customer relationship end to end, meaning they own all the data and insights about your customers. Which really leads me to something, as we work with a number of QSR businesses, one of the big challenges I hear a lot about is we still make a lot of our decisions based on gut-driven versus data-driven. Even though we have a lot of the tools in place to mine and understand the data, we're still not 100% sure what our consumers are thinking or doing in many, many cases. So for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we'll see how fast I move along here. I really want to talk about 3 specific areas as it relates to consumer insight and market research. The part 1, I'll touch on some of the challenges that we see facing the consumer insight and market research industry today. In part 2, I'll outline some examples of research technology and really how QSRs are using this new technology to gather better consumer insights and then ultimately turn them into action. And then finally, in part 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of virtualization and really where the future of research and research tech is headed. So let's get started with some of the trends that are affecting the consumer insight industry as a whole. I love this quote by David Ogilvy. I think he really said it best. And this has really always been one of the biggest challenges in business and brands ever since really the beginning, is that consumers really don't think how they feel, and they don't say what they think, and they don't always do what they say. And traditionally, we would turn to market research to try to understand this behavior and really try to get into the head of the consumer. Tools like focus groups, long format surveys, even things like one-to-one interviews, they're fantastic tools. However, they were designed at a different time, and they really weren't designed to keep up with the speed that the customer and the consumer is moving today. One of the real big challenges facing traditional market research has been the rise of big data. Like, after all, why do we need to collect more data when we have a wealth of data and new insights about consumer behavior? Can't we really drive new understanding about consumers based on all of this data that we have? Not to mention that many of the tools that are available to mine this data are far cheaper and accessible, in some cases free. However, most of big data still only tells you the what part of the customer story and not really about why. In other words, what they're doing can be derived from this information, but you can't always delve into what the why part of it is. And not to mention, it's still very difficult to test new ideas using big data or big data analytics tools. Another big challenge we're seeing as well is that the traditional linear-based approach to marketing and product development, this linear-based approach is really fueled by usually a big idea or a strategy, and then research kind of comes in behind and validates that idea. But unfortunately, what happens is downstream, when you start executing on that big idea, there's really no time and often no money to really be able to test that idea as you move along. So by the time the original strategy or this big idea hits the marketplace, often the consumer is either changed or moved on. So this is being really replaced, and we're seeing this at many of the organizations that we work for, by a new agile process. And really, this is really taken out of the books of Silicon Valley when they were releasing new product cycles. They would use this agile process where they would give a little bit of the product at a time. And this new process is really heavily fueled by consumer insight and data at every stage of the process. You're probably familiar with these processes now. From planning to execution to in market, you really get a sense of what the customer is thinking along the way. And the real advantage of this new agile process is you can course correct along the way. But again, in order for this new process to work, it really has to be bathed in a tremendous amount of new customer insight and data along the way to sort of determine which way you're going to go. And finally, one of the biggest challenges is that we see decision makers, they're not asking for less information or less consumer insight. They're actually asking for more data points than ever before. The traditional market researcher often is acted as the gatekeeper of the process, but also often the gatekeeper of those key insights. So when a business decision maker requests a new sort of, say, for example, a concept test, or maybe they're doing a limited time offer test, the market researcher or consumer insight pro would then go into the marketplace, collect that information, and then feed back to them a report. Well, the problem with this is with all the requests coming in, and really research departments are smaller than they've ever been, now we're getting a logjam of requests. Often they can be slow and expensive, and then there's no real action connected to them. And as I mentioned before, is because they're the gatekeeper, often the data is centralized versus being decentralized across the organization. We're hearing a lot of stories as well about business decision makers taking things into their own hands, matters into their own hand, where they went around the market researcher or the consumer insight professional and they developed and launched their own study. There's lots of tools out there, after all, like Facebook polling and other do-it-yourself tools that'll allow you to write your own questions, put it out in the marketplace, ask consumers questions. Often we've seen this lead to bad data or incorrect decisions that get made by the business decision makers, but they got their information faster and quicker than they would through the normal processes. So there's a lot of challenges facing both the consumer insight business and also the QSR businesses, like all businesses. And really this is what it's saying, is that the traditional market research industry needs to, and by the way, it is changing. And let's talk a little bit about that current state of the industry and how it's really driving change. I love this slide. This is really about how big the marketing and research tech space really is. And it slowly has been growing, particularly over the last 10 years, where I remember back 10 years ago when this report was first published, there was only about 150 marketing technology solutions on the market. Chief Martech publishes this annual report on a number of marketing technologies. And as of April 2019, we're seeing some 7,000 plus solutions in the market, which is really a dizzying amount of various different technologies and solutions available, and probably something that's really difficult for end brands to try to make decisions around what's the right solution for us. The other thing is BDO estimates the spending on marketing technology is now surpassed 121 billion worldwide. So this is serious business that's going on here. And these tools and platforms range from designing faster and better products and ads. We can think of systems like Adobe for that, to managing sales and customer relationships better. For example, Salesforce and their tool sets, to better managing customer data, and also managing the process of conducting market research, which really leads me to where ResearchTech is today. In fact, within the marketing technology ecosystem, there is somewhere around 600 plus tools and platforms that are focused on gathering consumer data and conducting market research. There's lots of ways to break down this research tech ecosystem. This is just one way of how we like to look at it. And it's sort of broken down into these four categories. You have specialized tools, which really make up the largest set of research tech. So you have things like facial recognition from Realize, which really allow you to get into the emotion, or at least be able to understand the emotion that somebody is expressing about your product or service or offer. To video technology from VoxPopMe, which VoxPopMe has actually created a fantastic tool to not only be able to capture video, but to be able to analyze that video in near real time. And then finally, we have AI chatbots that are conducting one-on-one interviews that are really replacing the classic interviewer in a qualitative fashion. And then we have marketplaces. So marketplaces is really sort of, I'll call it a collection of tech methods, audiences. It's really a mixed bag of solutions brought together and allow you to go in and self-select which solution that you want to use in a specific area. Automation, which is near to our heart because of our Methodify platform, is probably the newest technology to the marketplace, and it's hard to see any industry that's not being affected by automation in some way. Market research and consumer insight is one of them. And this is probably getting most of the attention given the fact of the speed and cost implications to automating much of the market research process. I'm going to go deeper into that a little later as well. And then we have survey tools. Survey tools have been around for a very, very long time, and they're getting more and more attention due to things like customer experience. Qualtrics, for example, focuses specifically in that area. And in fact, it actually got purchased by SAP for $8 billion. So again, this is serious business is going on within the research tech space. I thought what I'd do just to kind of simplify things a little bit and also be able to dig into some case studies essentially around various different research technologies. I thought I'd focus on these three categories. For one, mobile and video are things that we're all used to today as far as technology, but how are they being adapted for research purposes? So I want to dig into those two areas. And then automation, I'll spend a little more time on it as a category and talk specifically about how automation is really changing the game. And when you think about mobile technology, mobile is really about location, 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 and in the moment and contextual testing. Video is really allowing us to put a face on the customer, much like application like facial recognition with Realize. You have applications like VoxPop that are capturing video and allowing you to really tease out what the real emotions. And I'm going to go into a little bit of that later on as well. And again, finally, with automation, it's really speed, 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 and more speed. So what is mobile research? There's really nothing new here. However, the way it's being applied for research purposes is quite powerful. In fact, it's been a growing area that we've been using various different mobile technologies for. Using mobile tech for research is really about capturing the right moment at the right time with the right customer. You can collect data at the point of an experience, for example, or you can have it where it's recalling the experience while they're there. So we get better recall rates on the experience because they're in the moment. The other thing you can do with mobile research as well is you can attach what's called passive metering or passive data collection. So instead of asking somebody questions in the moment, you may be just following what they're doing via location, or maybe there's social media trends or other things that you're collecting data to actually supplement the overall research piece. Some of the sort of use cases we're seeing, particularly within the QSR space, is if there's a sponsored event. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, we can measure some lift within the sponsored event, but we really don't know how people feel about that event. And often if we ask questions post the event, again, back to the recall, they forget about that event and really how they felt in the moment. We're now able to send people directly to a specific event. The actual graphic you see there was about a parade that was being conducted, and we were able to send customers to that parade. And as they moved in and out of the parade, we were able to track their movements and behaviors, but also be able to ask them questions as they moved through the parade about brand recall and how they were feeling in the moment. The other big thing that I talked about was this passive tracking and metering, which is about the ability to be able to actually track people. The one thing we have within the research space is there's a lot of questions about doing this as an activity, but because we're opting people in for research purposes, they're more able to do this kind of activity. And we're also separating out any sort of personal identified information and just providing back to the brands exactly what the user was thinking and feeling at the time versus giving them personal identified information. And customers feel much more comfortable with that kind of activity. How does it work? Well, it's pretty simple. We select an audience that could be a subset of your customers that we invite to the experience, or we use things like research panels or research audiences. We have them download an application. We have a fairly large audience ourselves. Much of the time, they already have the application downloaded. And then we invite them to either go complete a task or go to an event. In this case, this is an example of we were working with a beverage company, and they were hosting a very large party, and they wanted to capture what the sentiment was from millennials. What was really interesting about this study was, we gathered more information than we could even possibly imagine, but the response rate was fantastic. In fact, it was 20% above average. We had a 45% response rate from millennials, which is very significant because it's very difficult to engage them in doing various different research studies. And we also had about 450% greater than industry average for millennials as well. So again, they like this kind of medium. The one thing we noticed as well was that, yes, we could geofence them, target them, track some of their activities, but we didn't have to ask them a full set of questions either after or during the event. We could ask them pinpointed questions as they move throughout the event. So one or two questions at a time, not to overwhelm them about the experience, and also not to interrupt them, but we were still actually getting in the moment tracking an experience. So it's a fantastic medium if you're looking to really understand your customers at specific events or even in-store events as well, and sending them, for example, to your QSR retail outlet. So video research, again, everybody's probably very familiar with video, and video has really been taking off over the past few years. We use video in the process of conducting consumer research, mainly for, again, to try to get that real emotions out of them. So instead of answering a question via text, they would literally use any one of their various different devices, whether it's their laptop or a mobile device, and they would respond to a question. And that question would then be videotaped. And then inside of the system, we use a system called VoxPop. They're a partner of ours. Inside of the system, essentially those videos are lined up and you're able to go through and, for example, say you're trying to understand sentiment, you can then parse out people that have positive sentiment versus people that have negative sentiment. And the system will automatically create something that's called a story reel. And that story reel is a little video clip of everybody that says positive things about your brand or product or whatever it might be that you're testing, or it can parse out negative responses. Now, you could do things like have a group of people just talking about your competitors or just talking about your brand. So you can slice and dice the actual videos in many, many, many ways. So why is this such a big deal right now? Because video has been used in research purposes for a long time. Well, the big deal is production costs and the automation of the process. So it used to be you had to have a video crew, or even now that cameras have come down in much lower price, you still had to go through editing process. It was a cumbersome, long, difficult process. In fact, I've been involved in many focus groups in the past as well that we typically videotape the focus groups, but then cataloging that video and transcribing that video afterwards was labor intensive and expensive. Now with tools that are in the marketplace, ResearchTech tools, you're able to capture the video, but then all the videos are transcribed literally in real time. So you can start playing around with the video and literally creating those story reels I talked about in near real time. The great thing about this, again, as I mentioned, is it's the emotional component out of this. So you get a real sense of what people are. You can see their faces. I've been in meetings as well. That stat that VoxPop has, about almost 60% of executives prefer video over stats. Well, who doesn't love watching a video? And when you see your actual customers either pouring out positive things about your organization or negative, it's amazing how the executives sit forward and pay attention to the videos over a pie chart or a graph. It's a very, very powerful medium to really get people's attention. So the last area that I want to talk about in terms of research tech is this idea of automation. And really, in the automation space, what's happening is they're taking the entire research process, the end-to-end experience, from selecting an audience to selecting a methodology or crafting a methodology to fielding that methodology to actual customers, to then gathering that data, analyzing that data, and producing a report. That entire end-to-end experience has now been automated with tools like Methodify. And automation really is the sort of the fastest area in research tech, and it's actually showing up in many different areas, as I mentioned, with video, automating the process there. But this idea of end-to-end automation is something that there's a few companies that are really focused specifically in this area. If you start to think about the traditional market research process, as I was mentioning in terms of the end-to-end, often going through that very long process could take 6 to 8 weeks. We've had clients come to us and say, just to get a simple concept test, say they're producing a new ad campaign, just to get that concept test tested in the marketplace would take somewhere like 6 weeks to get the report back. Well, often by then the market has either changed or there's been other things happen that really haven't allowed you to be able to do that, because we have to move so much faster in the marketplace. So where automation comes in is automation is literally pre-programmed research methodologies, and concept test and message test or limited time offering testing are examples of that, which these pre-programmed methodologies, you can simply select one and then use it and get the results back in hours, not weeks, in a perfectly formed report. So really the advantages of this and the problems that it's really solving is that speed and cost. So you can imagine moving from a 4 to 6 week return to now you can get your results back in hours. Agile, as I talked about before, around so many organizations are moving to more of an agile process. This fits right nicely into that agile process where you can start to ask your customers along the development process versus at one point at the beginning or the end. And then accuracy, because these are pre-packaged or pre-programmed methodologies, you're actually asking the same questions. And essentially, you could give this to other business decision makers within the organization, and they wouldn't be able to go in and change the set of questions you're asking. So you know you're going to get the right data back. How does it work? It's literally as simple as 1, 2, 3. So first thing you would do is you choose a study type. So say, for example, you wanted to do a limited time offer. You may have a pre-packaged limited time offer testing that's sitting there waiting for you to select. After you select that, you then go through and you configure your study. It's a WYSIWYG interface where you would pick your audience, type, size, location, input some questionnaire requirements. So for example, what product you're testing, what brand it is, maybe your competitors. There might be a few pre-selected parameters that you'd be programming. Then they would actually go into um, the actual study itself, and it would be configured. And then the last thing you would do is maybe you want to upload some stimulus. Maybe you have some visuals to go along with that limited time offer. You can easily upload those stimulus. Once you're done all that, you hit go, sends it out to the marketplace, and you watch the real-time reporting coming in. And many of the QSRs are using this. I mentioned limited time offer testing is one of the example, but other ones are using it for positioning and product naming. That's a big one that's getting used a lot. Concept and ad testing is another one as well that gets used a lot. The limited time offer testing, I think that's really an interesting one just because of the fact of how quick the cycles are going now, and to get some sense of what the consumer is thinking and feeling about that, I think is super, super important. And campaign creative and concept testing obviously is a big one as well. If you have a new idea you want to put in the marketplace, it's great to be able to test it, maybe not once, but maybe several times along the development cycle. We've heard many horror stories about brands out there that spend millions of dollars on creative and test that creative at the very beginning. And then by the time it gets into the marketplace, again, the consumer has changed. Maybe there's been a cultural change or something that's happened in the marketplace. And all of a sudden, that great idea you had all of a sudden falls flat. I think a great example of that was the Peloton last year when they released their holiday ad, and it fell flat, and for lots of good reasons why it did, but they just weren't in tune with what the consumer was thinking or feeling at that time. So it can be very expensive if you spend all that money on a big ad campaign or a concept that you want to do, and you really haven't been able to test it, not just at the beginning, but throughout the actual development process. Because we all know you may have a big idea at the beginning, but it can be very different by the time it goes through all the various different executive sign-offs, and also even going through the editing process as well can change a concept from its original thought process. One of our very good friends at Wendy's, I love this. She said this to us last year, where she was always very frustrated with the fact that, there was in the research space, the common sort of joke was that, well, if you want something back really fast, the quality is not going to be really good. If you want it cheap, well, it's not going to be fast. With automation, we're really being able to see that you can pre-program or pre-package these methodologies, and because it automates the entire end-to-end process, you can then get all three of these as results back. And really on that note, people often ask us, what's the benefit of research automation? Well, obviously we talked about quality, price, and speed, which are the obvious things. But things like scalability is a really, really big one. So one of the things we're noticing is Often we see research departments and QSRs, they may only consist of a handful of people. In some cases, they may have only one person that's managing a lot of requests. Well, how do you scale that individual? Using things like research automation allows you to pre-program or pre-package proven methodologies, and then allow other business decision makers be able to go out and use those methodologies, which gives you way bigger scale and reach and removes you out of the process. Back to that gatekeeper that I mentioned, you're no longer the gatekeeper and you're allowing other people to manage their own studies. The thing around protecting personal identified information and security, obviously those are huge hot topics right now. And the ability when you're automating this is you're putting customers inside of one of these systems, but inside the system it's separating out the PII data from the actual data collected, so you're protecting your customers from exposing them to anything beyond the actual study itself. And then from a security perspective, wherever you want these to be housed in terms of the final data, it doesn't matter in today's world. So there's a lot of benefits to leveraging research automation beyond the quality, price, and speed. So I talked a little bit about ResearchTech today. And by the way, all of those solutions are available in the market today. Let's talk a little bit about where we see it going. And some of these things are a little out there, so to speak, but we definitely see that this is where things are headed. So we've had a lot of discussions internally about could we see a time where it's not just about automating the entire process, could you actually virtualize the entire research process? So you think about a virtual interviewer. So today, which normally happens is if you're conducting one-on-one interviews or focus groups or something like that, difficult to scale those. There's only so many places somebody can be. Is there a way to actually be able to scale that opportunity beyond doing things like online surveys? Could you actually have an interviewer be virtual? The middle area around virtual people, this is a way out there, but with the advancements of AI, could you actually develop facsimiles or synthetic individuals or people, and that would represent a group of people and they're responding to what you actually feel? So sounds like a little bit sort of futuristic, but this actually exists today, and I'll show you a little bit about how that exists today. And then the virtual analysis side of things, there's actually most of the work in terms of virtualizing the research process is actually happening in that area. And this is because a lot of those big data analytics tools have come a long way, and they're actually able to go through a tremendous amount of data and be able to sort of uncover those really interesting insights. I'm just going to cover off the virtual interviewer and the virtual people and give you a little sense around what's possible in those areas. So we actually have these sessions here where we call them Imagine If sessions, and we literally ask ourselves some of these big questions around, imagine if you could interview thousands of consumers at the same time. So you actually could take that richness that a moderator actually can have when they're having a one-on-one conversation with an individual, and getting all that richness and information out of that and be able to direct the conversation, unlike an online survey where it's very quantitative in terms of the way it sets its questions. In a qualitative fashion or in a moderated fashion, you can actually explore things. Well, how do we do that in a digital world? Well, there are already great tools out there that are using chatbot technology that are supplementing the idea of using a virtual interviewer. So Chris is an example of that sort of capability. And essentially what Chris does is it's just like having a regular conversation, but in a chat format. And you can show the individual stimulus. So you can show them new offers and get their feeling about it. And the great thing about this is if you're just answering no, yes, giving sort of one-word answers, it can tease more out of that and ask more questions to really let you expand on, instead of just giving one-word answers, to get more rich information and data out of that. And all the results are essentially in real time, calculated, and then giving you a report on exactly how those people are feeling. So instead of being able to have to do one-on-one interviews where you can only interview a certain amount of people, you can actually scale this, and Chris could interview tens of thousands of people, time teasing out all these various different questions and get really great um, information out of it. The other one that we ask ourselves a lot of questions about, or start to sort of think about, is this idea of, could you have your customer in the boardroom with you as you're developing your new ideas? Maybe you're developing new products or new offer ideas. Could you have them with you in the brainstorming sessions? Traditionally, what we do right now in that area is we literally have focus groups, or we do sort of post analysis of these things. Again, time consuming, costly, and they're not really part of the brainstorming session. You've still involved experts at it and not really included the customer at the table. Now, I'm not sure if we want the customer at the table during those brainstorming sessions, but if we could do it in a controlled fashion, what would that look like? A few years ago, Gartner actually identified something that was sort of rising to the top, and they actually have this idea of what's called a digital twin. And essentially what they're saying is that every physical object in the world has a digital version of itself. So why couldn't people have a digital version of themselves as well? And at CES this past January, Samsung, amongst a number of other big name technology companies, showcased virtualization of people, and meaning it was almost like a chatbot coming to life. And this is actually a company that we've been speaking with called EmoShape, and EmoShape has a synthetic individual called Rachel, and this is Rachel. And Rachel can respond to stimulus. So for example, Rachel could read an article and then respond in an emotional way how you would respond. So essentially, Rachel could represent your customer or customer segmentation and be able to respond in real time how you were feeling or how she was feeling about that idea. So we see a time where you may have a number of these Rachels, if you will, sitting in your boardroom, and you're showing menu boards, offers, different concepts, and they're responding in real time to how they feel about those different ideas. And you could also extract other data about it as well. So this is a little futuristic, but to bring it back home, one of the companies we've been working with is a company called Persona Panels. In fact, we've invested in them. We feel so strongly about this idea. And Persona Panels allows you to do things like text-based offer testings or limited time offer testings, as an example, where you would literally type into the area where it has the message test, and in real time, you would see those segments below respond to that. So Persona Panels uses this thing called animated persona, which is really a machine learning agent. For all intents and purposes, it's representing actual people and their interest level of each one of those areas. So you might say, hey, we never test limited time offers. With something like this, you could actually test hundreds of offers in real time until you narrow down into exactly the ones that have, or exactly the segments you want that would have the largest interest to that idea. Or new product idea testing, as well as another big one. So these tools are being used at very early stage testing for research purposes. And this exists today and is on the market today, and working with collaboration with us. So just to kind of wrap it all up, just some sort of key takeaways. I talked a lot about how things like research automation and just research technology in general are really allowing the ability for data and insights to be shared across an organization in a very seamless way. So we often refer to it as democratization of insights and data. So you may have a small research department, you may not have any research department, but it'll allow you through these capabilities of these new tools and platforms, you're actually able to conduct consumer research and get quality feedback back in basically near real time. The other thing about the idea of the agile process that I mentioned is that QSR is incorporating customer feedback more often. I think this has been one of the biggest challenges, back to the gut driven versus data driven slide that I had earlier, is how can we actually start to include consumer feedback in everything that we're doing, or at least in things that we know we need to get some sense of where our consumers' head is at. And ResearchTech, amongst other things, are allowing you to do that in a very seamless way. And then the final thing around virtualization, by no means, this does not need real people. I think everybody gets very concerned when you start talking about AI and automation as well. The reality is you still need real people that are not just managing this, but are really allowing us to really feed the machine, if you will. Uh, the truth is that the big ideas aren't coming from the machine. The machine is really just allowing you to very quickly scale and test things and allow for deeper ideas of how you can action on those insights. So we're just about, or